that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephen.
Okay. Yep. And again, yeah, sorry for last minute on that. I was looking at the calendar, and then I listened to way too many podcasts of like defense and military technology, and so I had an idea for one, but then so it was already Monday, nothing on the horizon. So I emailed Bree. I was like, hey, like I got an idea for a thing. It's like 95% complete. That was total. I was at 0% complete. Made all this in the past couple of days. But I figured if I waited like a month, and I'm still going to wait till the last minute to build the slides anyways, and I'll have lost interest in this topic by then. And so I thought I might as well just throw it on the calendar for now. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, mesh sensing. So what is mesh sensing? That is really kind of something you do every day in your own personal life, biologically. You think about like your eyes, your ears, those are sensors. And by themselves, they can kind of do some stuff like your eyeball. It can see images, it can distinguish between colors, it can track movements. Your other eyeball's doing the same thing. But then when you combine them together, though, you get new data from that. You get depth perception. So you got two eyes, they're a couple inches apart. You're looking at the same thing. They kind of cross-reference each other, and you can perceive depth up to about 20 feet for the human eye. Your ears are doing the same thing as well. You think about, what's your ear doing? It's perceiving sound, listening to tone, can detect volume if it's loud or soft. But then when you have two ears, you get new data, which you couldn't get alone, is you can get direction and kind of drive distance as well, where one ear is louder than the other. You can start triangulating that, oh, that's coming, to the forward right of me, or that's coming over to my left side, which was data that an individual eye or individual ear couldn't really figure out on its own. And so kind of defining it, so mesh sensing is approach surveillance and defense that replaces a reliance on a few high-end sensors with a distributed mass of interconnected mid-tier and lower-tier sensors that can cooperatively track, analyze, and react to threats as a single system. And it's a kind of defining features are it's decentralized, where it's not a central hub, it's everything is sharing the data processing load. It's multimodal, meaning it blends a diverse set of sensors. So you got radars, visual sensors, acoustic sensors, electronic intelligence sensors, all sharing all the same data to build a picture of the battlefield. It's also collaborative, so it's not sending everything up to a central hub. It is peer-to-peer sharing of all that data across the network. So kind of collaboration between everything. It's like old, BitTorrents when you were trying to, download, music and video games and movies and stuff, 20 years ago, before there was a lot of data, high bandwidth data. You had to BitTorrent it. And then another, it's emergent. It is where the measured data is cross-referenced to calculate derivative data, just like I was talking about with the eyes and the ears, how even though your eyes don't directly measure depth, you combine them together, you can derive that data, even though it's not being directly measured on its own. And then it's kind of a spectrum that goes from a star structure to a mesh structure. Those are kind of the two overall high and low end of your sensing network. And so structurally, with the star, it is all nodes are connected to a single centralized hub, like spokes on a wheel. And this is kind of like how a lot of military structures are now, where you got all your lower level echelons reporting up to one central node, and each one is on its own doing its own thing. It doesn't really talk to the other guys. It just gets orders from its higher up and it sends back information. Doesn't really care what the other guys are doing. Whereas compared to mesh, it's more distributed, where every sensor and node is directly talking either to its neighbors or to everyone. There's also kind of layers to that. Is it just talking to the ones that are near it? Is it talking to everyone at the same time? Kind of gets into different levels of how meshed that really is. Then as far as data flow, yes, like I said, it is for a centralized star system. That is where the sensor detects an object and it sends that data straight to its central hub for processing. Doesn't really care or know what anyone else is seeing. Whereas with meshed, it is much more collaborative, where multiple sensors are seeing the same thing and they're sharing that information and sharing it with other sensors that can't even see it yet. So everyone knows what's going on. Everyone has a good view of the whole battlefield. Strengths of them, so with the star systems, each point is self-contained and fully capable on its own. You think about, modern day monetary military equipment, some SAM sites, for example, like each one, like an SA-15, that is fully capable, surface-to-air missile and radar system on its own. It can shoot down targets, has a very long reach. It can operate independently. Well, everything else that's in its system, it kind of helps it as far as strategically. Yeah, you can send that information up, get orders back down of, move over here, go over there. But if you take out everything else, it's still a fully capable system without any other inputs. Compared to a mesh system, where it's completely reliant on that network, it must have that that network feeding it all its information, because each node independently isn't really capable of being a self-reliant, capability generating system. The difference, though, is that mesh is much more survivable, though. It is, since you can scale it upwards, it's a lot of cheaper systems compared to very large systems. You take out one node, it's not really that big of a dent. You can have other nodes cover for it. Whereas compared to the star system, you take out one node and you're losing a huge amount of coverage. You lost that entire sector now, and those are big, expensive capabilities that you're losing the price of that. You're losing the coverage of it. All that area that it was covering is now gone. And like I said, it's kind of a spectrum. So at the very far end would be like a monolithic star where everything goes to one brain. This is kind of like a CCTV system where you got a bunch of different cameras. They're all reporting that information up to your main data center, but none of them are talking to each other. None of them know what's going on with the other cameras. Anything going on in one camera doesn't really affect what's happening to this camera. You got one camera looking at your front door, one at your back door. They don't talk to each other. They don't, really calculate anything between each other. They're just sending and receiving data. That kind of upgrades to a federated star. That's more like your conventional military system, where you've got a bunch of lower tier systems that are reporting upwards, and they're also reporting upwards. And so no one has like one boss. Everyone's got a boss, and that guy's got a boss, and he's got like 10 guys working under him, and each of them have 10 guys working under them. That's also kind of variable. You think about a Russian-style military, which is extremely hierarchical, where the lowest guy that's allowed to really think is a colonel. The lowest guy that's got to talk is a lieutenant, and anyone lower than that, you're just taking orders. Whereas, American-style military, you have a little bit leaning more into the mesh style, where, like if a lieutenant loses his captain, then he'll start talking to some other lieutenants in the next formation over, maybe, to better derive a solution. Next up is the cloud mesh. That's where everything goes to a virtual cloud. That's kind of like Google Maps, where you're driving along the highway and you're looking at your Google Maps and you see there's a traffic jam up ahead. Like, your phone isn't talking directly to all these other phones over Bluetooth or anything. They're all talking to a cloud and kind of pulling and sending data upwards into that cloud, and then communicating over that cloud to derive data of, hey, all these cars ahead of me, they're all stopped. That's a traffic jam up there, and so I need to reroute or something. And then you get to the fully distributed mesh. That's more like a flock of birds, where there's not any central processing. It is, each bird is looking at what's going on with the other birds around it. I've noticed that the bird to the left of me is shifting. I'm going to shift a little bit. That causes the guy to the right of me to also shift. And you end up with this hive mind style network where there's no central processing. It's just the whole thing is the processor. And so there's a few different layers to this. So let's start with the physical layer. So what's actual physical hardware and equipment? So like I said, it's multimodal. So it's going to be a diverse set of sensors. So you got your traditional radars. You also got acoustic sensors, your visual sensors, whether it be just typical camera or infrared. And you've also got perhaps some type of electronic signal detection. And diversity of signatures from each of those as well. So you're getting your RCS, your RF signatures, your visual, heat, acoustics. And then an important part of this, especially as it relates to defensive nature, is you want queuing of those. So you want to, you're got a bunch of air defense equipment out there. You don't want to start, emitting all your radar energy right away. Everyone's going to find you. So you want to start with what is going to be the most passive, what's going to be not emitting anything. That's going to be your passive detectors, your audio, your visuals. your least requirements first, and then as you get further down the kill chain, you want to start turning on your bigger, more exquisite systems that can do a little bit better targeting. And then there's also the network layer. So when all this stuff is networked together, you get really a God's eye view of the battlefield rather than that fog of war where I'm here and I talk to some guy on the radio and I kind of understand what's going on over there, but mostly I just see what's going on with me. Whereas as you build a better network of all these different sensors and all feeding each other into your receptors, you can start building that. If you've ever played like strategy games like StarCraft, where each little individual piece doesn't see their whole thing. They see the entire battlefield that their friendly guys can see. And then you get, like I talked about with that derivative data, so you can get triangulation where multiple sensors can start calculating coordinates of objects that they couldn't really calculate on their own. And then there's also the intelligence layer. So what is actually controlling all of these things? So you kind of split it between human and AI. And so there's different levels of human control. So there's fully human operated. That would be like a direct human control of every physical action. So like, when I used to fly Apaches, this is something we used to practice was like target handovers. And we did like two methods, either did it audio or visual. And so audio is like, I'm looking at my target and I got my, buddy over there. He's a couple hundred meters away. I want him to look at the same target I'm looking at. I would just start walking him onto it. I'll say, there's some central point of like, hey, tell me when you're tally on the bridge. And he'd look for the bridge and he'd call tally. He'd say, oh yeah, tally bridge. And I'd say, okay, move 300 meters left, there's a barn. And he'd say, yep, tally barn. So, okay, 200 meters up, there is a tractor. So, yep, tally tractor. And it's okay, there's another tractor next to that one to the right. That's your target. And say, yep, tally target. And that takes a long time. And same thing with visual is I'd pull his feed, he'd pull my feed, I'd look at a target. And then you try to like pan your camera around until your picture matched their picture, until you're seeing the same thing they're looking at, which also like, dragging a little joystick around, trying to look at this data over here to compare it to my data, that takes forever. Then you can move up from there rather than, fully operated. You can do a human directed where there is a delegated automation of some particular computation. So again, back to my Apache helicopter analogy. So when I'm shooting at a target, I'm finding my target on my own. I'm identifying, yep, that's the thing that I want to shoot. I'm going to aim my laser at it, and I'm going to start pulling the trigger on the laser designator. And then I'm telling the computer, basically, I want you to do calculations of, I'm not going to measure the range. You're going to measure the range. You're going to measure like, okay, it's, I'm getting this far away laser, but on this altitude, let me do the triangulation or the trigonometry of, here's exactly the coordinates of that target. And then I'm going to pull the trigger or fire the missile. And the missile is going to figure out, okay, I need to do this trajectory to impact and intercept that target going at this rate of speed. And so it's kind of a mixture. From moving on from there, you get human in the loop. That is where it is a semi-autonomous, where machines are making the decisions and the human's sitting there watching to kind of give consent. That is like where the computer's like, okay, I found a target. I think that's a bad guy. I want to kill it. Do you agree? And I push the button of, yep, I accept. Go ahead and kill that target. And it kills that target. Then you got human in the loop. That is supervised, kind of like, modern day Tesla, where it's got the automatic driver feature, but you want to still sit in that driver's seat. And if anything goes wrong, you're going to jump on the controls and stop it from crashing. And then there's human out of the loop, where it's fully autonomous. That is more like those Waymo robot taxis that are completely driverless, and they got a full sensor suite. They're more trusted, I guess, to do everything, and you just sit in the back and hope you don't die in a car crash. But apparently they haven't killed anyone yet, but maybe. So what advantages does AI have? So it's a lot about speed. Like I mentioned with my Apache helicopter thing, like, yeah, moving a little joystick around to look through a camera feed of, where's the target set, that takes a really long time. Like when you're up there doing it, it seems like it's really going very fast. But if you ever get a chance to, for some reason, you're at an Army base, you go out to the aviation shooting range, you're watching Apache helicopters shoot at targets. It's really boring because you're sitting there and the tower operator gives them a target, and then like 2 minutes later they shoot it because it just takes forever to find it sometimes. Then you got also your intelligence of queuing, where AIs can quickly cross-coordinate. Like I mentioned again, where I've got my buddy on one system, he's on the other system, trying to walk him onto a target that takes a while. With an AI, I can do that a lot faster. You can say, I'm looking this direction, you need to look that direction at this angle, and you're going to quickly find the target. A lot faster. You can also do that data fusion where it's deriving that targeting solution really fast. Like I'm not going to pull up my calculator and start doing trigonometry. The AI can do that way faster. And then that handoff as well, of where you're handing over targets from one sensor to the next. Say you got like a target moving across the sky, and I know it's going this direction at this angle. An AI already knows, oh, I got another sensor. Sensor number 4 is over in that direction. Activate sensor 4, start looking at this angle, and you're going to see the target coming from, this direction. And that whole thing kind of combines to build a very intelligent kill web where AI is quickly determining sensor shooter pairings where it knows like here's the target and I know I got shooter number 3 over here. He's the closest. He's got the best angle. Go ahead and shoot him without some human sitting there looking at maps and trying to determine everything. Then it's more as far as the back to the kind of the physical aspects. What does that data link really look like? How do you achieve that? Which is one of the big challenges. And there's a few different ways I could think of just kind of off the top of my head here. So you got from simple to more complex. So cable, fiber optic lines, those are, they got some advantages and disadvantages. So they're high bandwidth, they're pretty reliable and resilient. You're not gonna lose your data link because you're looking in the wrong direction and there's a tree in your way or something. Fairly unjammable. They're undetectable as well. They're not emitting anything. The con though is it's the physical constraints, which maybe a long time ago that might have been a bigger deal that might have dissuaded people. But I think if you look at like Ukraine now with the way the drone war is going, where if you had told me a couple years ago that you're going to have drones that are going to be tethered to fiber optic cables flying 10, 20, 30 kilometers with the little Dragon fiber optics behind it, and you're going to do this at mass of like thousands of them at a time, I would have thought it was ridiculous. But that seems like a lot more feasible now that, hey, maybe you could just start dropping off fiber optic links across your whole country now. Radio, it's simple, it's mobile. Either, at the lower level, 2 guys talking radios, trying to point at the same thing. At the higher level, some kind of radio controlled automation. It's got a lot of disadvantages though. It's the bandwidth issue. It's jammable. It's very line of sight dependent, and it's very detectable. Kind of the same with SATCOM. So that gives you at least over the horizon comms where you're not, line of sight anymore. And it gives you higher bandwidth as well. But there's also, since it's gone all the way up to a satellite, there's all the latency. It's also jammable and detectable too. And then cellular Wi-Fi. So this is also got the pros and cons of one, it's very high bandwidth, and then there's no setup cost. All the infrastructure is really already there. Like if you're in some major city, some major country, and you decide I need to build this big, defensive network, all that infrastructure is there. You just tap into the Wi-Fi, the cellular system, and you can get all that. And the issue is this, that infrastructure can go away very quickly in the times of war, that it's very infrastructure dependent. So they take out the local power plant. Now you don't have your entire defensive network anymore. It's all gone. And it's also jammable. And then the security issue as well. Like in the early days of Ukraine, a lot of soldiers were using cell phones to communicate because they weren't being jammed, even though the radios were. But then the cell phones were being, calculated like the positions. So people were getting hit with artillery because they were on their cell phone too much. And then so more along the lines of the system architecture. So let's take a look at some of the electro-optical systems. So there's a few different types of cameras you can use. You got daylight cameras. Those have the advantage of you can get really good range in the daylight. You get very clear picture. The issue is all that range goes away at night. So once you get to night vision devices, there's really 2 ways you can see at night, either with NVGs or infrared. And so night vision devices like infrared or night vision goggles, those are really just low light. They are amplifying the light source. And so the pros of that is, there's a light source out there, there's a light bulb on, any type of light, it amplifies that, and you can find that really easily. It's just like emitting like a big pulse that you can find really quickly. Kind of the disadvantages though is that you're really seeing the same image you were at day. It's just really worse. So anything that's out there that's tank or a biological, a human or anything, you're not really getting that much clarity on it. It's just kind of like a really bad image. Infrared has the advantage of rather than amplifying light, it's amplifying heat. And so a light is not necessarily hot, and something hot isn't necessarily a light. And so in this case, you can see the humans really well. You can see any heat signatures, but anything that is bright or like a light, you're not going to really see that any better than you would anything else. However, the image clarity gets a lot better for anything, especially like people. You can't really hide the heat signature of a person really well. You're always going to see them. Vehicles, those are pretty hot, but you can turn off a vehicle. You can't turn off a human. But yeah, anything dangerous is usually going to be emitting heat, so that's always going to be helpful. And then triangulations, how does it work? So here I got my blue guy, I got my red guy, and I know his direction. I know he's at to my east here, but I have no idea how far away he is. You can kind of calculate, not really calculate, you can kind of schwack it with, well, I know this thing is this big. I can kind of estimate how far away that is. But when you get started getting into camera systems, it's like, well, what's my level of zoom that's making it that big? As a person, I can't look through like a zoomed camera and then, really do the calculations of I'm at, 1.7 times zoom and it's this many pixels across my screen. Maybe an AI can do that a little better. But still, it's not really a reliable method for really targeting anything. And so when you do triangulations, you want to get two different guys out there, and you start doing some calculations there, and you can figure out exactly where that is. There's some issues with that, though. So there's an error. So when something is, a good amount of distance apart, it's forming kind of a wide angle, you still get a little bit of error. You get your actual location versus your potential location. So it could be really anywhere in that box because even a laser, it's not really a, infinitely small line. It's still some volume to it. And especially as you are aiming that, you might not be able to slew your camera at 0.0001 degree, 0.002 degree. It might be a little bit of like I'm at 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. There's some error in between. Which as you amplify that over time or over distance, you start getting a larger error. And especially as you start getting things further away, that potential error, it starts getting a lot larger and wider to where the closer you are, or the closer the cameras are in relation to each other, in relation to the target, the smaller that angle is, more error. So really the only way to kind of fix that is you just have to keep getting wider and wider apart, but then eventually you're going to run out of, well, how much resolution does that camera have? How far can it see? I mean, I guess going back to that slide on the different types of camera, like a daylight camera, modern cameras can get like a pretty good distance of, 20, 30, 40 miles of pretty good resolution if they're, kind of a more high-end camera. Whereas like night vision and infrared, like those are really, really short distance. Like under a good infrared camera, you're not really getting that much range out of it that you can, really pick up heat signatures. 10 kilometers maybe. Here's a couple of videos. Let me see if I can pull these up here. I might have to come out of my sharing mode. So here's the kind of issues with cameras of. This is the parallax effect where, yeah, in the background, you got the mountain. It's not moving, but it kind of looks like it's moving a little bit. And then here you got all this equipment, you got telephone poles, you got trucks where they're not moving at all, but it looks like they're just zipping by. And so the issue that creates, and go to the next video here, is, for example, this one, where you got this airplane that it looks like it's just floating in the air. And if you're looking at one single sensor camera, like you're not really getting the full picture of what's going on there. You're not really calculating the speed. You're getting kind of a fooled on the location of it because the optical is not really giving you all the data you would expect the same way that a radar would. A radar's giving you all the data you need. It's giving you range, location, distance, everything. And so what you end up with is, for example, this, you got this UFO parallax illusion where this thing looks like it's just zipping through this guy's backyard, but you zoom out and you notice, oh, it's just like a golf ball tied to a string. And when you're zoomed out, you can tell, but when you're zoomed in, it looks like it's moving. And that leads to a lot of people, and quote the last video here, where from the latest UFO files, this object is just zooming along the ocean and they're going to shoot it down. and it looks like it's going really fast, but I mean that's just a balloon. It's going at whatever the speed of wind is, probably like 2 miles an hour, and it popped like a balloon. It's got little pieces that's clearly some type of surveillance balloon, but which takes my next slide. Yeah, I want to believe we all do. And then let's look at some practical examples. I got 2 more videos I'm gonna pull up, so I'll leave in this wider view here. And so there's a few different companies working on similar stuff. So Anduril, they got their system called Lattice, which is a multimodal sensor fusion, which kind of does everything we've been talking about today. Rafael, that's an Israeli company. They got something similar to Lattice, which is also doing multimodal sensor fusion. Then you got a few that are just doing independent things. So Northrop Grumman, they got their integrated battle command system, which does SAM, radar sensor to shooter fusion. Raytheon's got a system that does optical sensor fusion. Kvertus, I think it's a Ukrainian company. They do electrical signal detection for sensor fusion. And let's look at a couple of examples. And so this was a video I found of, let me pause it real quick. This is a guy, just some random guy on YouTube, that he took a bunch of webcams, he put them in a couple of windows around his apartment, and he was able to point up in the sky, find airplanes flying by, and then he ran a code he built, like a software code that can triangulate that. So on the right there, you've got that triangulated position where he's able to track that, and as you play it, there's an airplane. You can't even really see it on the webcam there, but the camera can see it, and it's tracking these airplanes flying. Now, the issue, though, is, well, what kind of resolution is that? Like, if you think about with the radar, that radar resolution's, cube or zone, a search radar, it's going to have a very large, like, hey, it's in this, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer box. It's over there somewhere. And if you get down to like a tracking radar, targeting radar, it's much more of like it is exactly right here within this 10-foot by 10-foot grid, send a missile to it. So how big of a camera, how much resolution would you need to get it from I see the object is over there and I can kind of tell where it's going versus I can actually put a missile on it. And then one last video here. This is a pretty cool way they're using sensor fusion. This Eagle Eye helmet, also by Anduril, where it's got a few different modes of just visual sensors, different stuff. It's got AI that's detected that it put a little red box on, hey, there's a guy over there. And where it gets really cool, though, as you can see there, this little pop-up came up where that is a drone that's up in the air that's also looking at that same location. It's also put a red box around that guy. And let me pause it in just a second here. These guys are going to go behind this container. There's another guy behind that other container. And even though this person that's looking, these guys are out of view, the drone can see it. The drone can calculate, oh, this guy's over here, that guy's over there, these other 2 guys are over here. Let me send that data down to the guy's headset, and I can fuse that data. Now, even though he's out of line of sight, I can see them, and I can figure out what it would look like from his perspective and put that image into his binoculars there, his headset, which I think is a pretty cool way to use that mesh sensing concept. And so why are we doing all this? So what is the problem with all of our traditional systems? So a big problem is the exquisite system problem. That is where you have these gigantic, really expensive sensors, such as radars, that cost millions of dollars. They take a really long time to design and build. I mean, you're only going to get a few of them out there into the field. Can't really get them out there in mass. And then once you lose one, like you lose in huge amounts of coverage. You lost millions of dollars. You lost, highly trained crew probably. There's a tendency these days, especially with like this current, drone war, is to get away from the big, exquisite systems to smaller, more scalable, more attritable systems. Another issue is the asymmetric threat. So really the targets have changed. So the radar systems and sensor systems, they were designed to shoot down F-15s, bombers, large airplanes. It wasn't really designed in an era where there's going to be 10,000 drones coming over the hill that are really small. And so it's not only the target calibration of rather than looking for this big airplane, now I'm looking for this little tiny drone. It's also the cost of I got this high cost sensor, very valuable missile, and I'm shooting down a $500 drone with it, or a $10,000 drone with a $1 million missile. And it's also a problem of saturation, where in the past, if you had, 100 F-15s coming at you, like that was a major operation. You got 100 drones, that's nothing. You can send 1,000 drones, and that's really no problem. They're sending, thousands of drones a day, and it's really no big deal. Whereas you can't consistently, send 100 F-35s every single day. Because some of those older radars, yeah, you could sense 100 targets, and that seemed like a big deal at the time. Not really a big deal anymore, where you need to be able to sense thousands of little teeny tiny targets. And another problem is the survivability problem. So radars are very loud as far as they're emitting their exact location. They're broadcasting everywhere. Anyone with a sensor that can detect that can pinpoint your location and shoot you. There's also that Death Star problem. If you have a single point of failure where, you have a major SAM site, you got an S-300 site, you lose your radar. Well, now that entire site's down because one sensor got destroyed. And that is going to, in turn, create really large gaps in your coverage of how much area of the battlefield you're scanning and able to target. And so this all kind of goes into a spectrum of active versus passive and coherent versus incoherent. And so what are the trade-offs of those? So an active system, it's very good at locating a target. It can, a radar is going to give you all the data you need. It's giving you the angle, it's giving you the range, it's giving you the velocity, giving you everything you need to find exactly, pinpoint where is that target. Whereas a passive, it's not really good at locating a target. It can kind of tell you what's in that direction, and I can see what it is, but that's about all I can tell you until I start, meshing together and building a better, more coherent system. But even when you do that, you have a radar which is directly measuring that information versus a bunch of sensors which are kind of deriving that data based on calculations, which can have errors. However, an active is bad at identifying a target. So a radar, it's going to see that there is a dot over there. It's flying up in the air. It's going at this speed, but it can't really tell the difference between, F-15, F-16, F-22. I mean, maybe with F-22, it's because it's got the different cross-section. But it's really identifying just objects. It can't tell, well, is that an Israeli F-35? Is that an American F-35? Without more information. You can't tell it just from the RCS alone. Whereas with a camera system, it's really good at identifying that target. I can tell exactly, oh, that is a F-15. I can read the tail number on it. I can know everything about it. I know which direction it's going because the guy, I can see the guy waving at me through my camera. Much better at performing that identification. However, the active sensors have a much better range. Radars can go really far, hundreds of kilometers. A camera, like I said, not really that far. Like at high resolution to get a targeting solution, is a lot more range limited. And it's a lot more weather dependent as well. Radar's really all weather, can see through clouds and stuff. Maybe it has a little bit of problems with moisture at some high levels, but it's not the significant drop off you see with the camera, where on a cloudy day, camera can't see anything. At night, a daylight camera can't see anything. You got to fall back on either your low light or your infrared. Another issue with radars is that they're very exquisite and expensive. You can't really build that many of them, cost a lot of money. With cameras, though, that's much more of your affordable mass. Even like a high-end camera might be a few $1,000s. A low-end radar is $1,000. A high-end radar could be millions. Then there's the overt versus covert. So overt meaning that it is broadcasting its location. You can see it. It's out there in the middle of the field. It's spinning around, and it is broadcasting a signal. Whereas a camera or microphone or some kind of detector, you can put that anywhere. You can have a camera just sitting in someone's window looking out. You can have it on a roof, in a tree line somewhere. It's a lot more disguisable. It's a lot smaller too. A little camera on a tripod is a lot harder to find than a giant radar dish spinning around in a field. And the radar is much more fragile, either themselves and as far as like the network itself, where its signal detection is more fragile. Tree lines can disrupt it. Takes one fragment of some explosive that hold things down. Now you've lost this entire region of coverage. Whereas the camera system's a lot more durable, where you take out one camera. I mean, first of all, it's going to be hard to find it to begin with. You take out one, it's not that big of a deal. There's probably another one a few hundred feet away, or maybe a couple of kilometers away, that can cover down on it. And then you get to the networking side, that coherent versus incoherent, where a coherent system, it requires that robust network of infrastructure But it's giving you that God's eye view of the battlefield, but also it's very fragile as well. Whereas you start taking down data centers, you start taking down power grids, you start losing a lot of that network. You might take out one power plant, now you lost half your country's sensor network. And then the incoherent, though, that's operating independently, very localized situational awareness, though, not getting that God's eye view of the battlefield. However, they're much more durable as far as that that networking, where if I'm a radar over here and that other radar 10 miles away goes down, it doesn't affect me at all. I'm still getting the same radar coverage I otherwise would have without it. And then if you look at what is the effectiveness of these? So a active system, the effectiveness of its radar and sensing everything, it's very effective. When you network it, it gets even more effective. Even when they're individually, they're pretty effective. They're still really good. They still have tremendous reach, the range. They can operate independently. They can do everything on their own. Having it as an IADS, an integrated system, just makes it a little bit better, gives it more a strategic value. Whereas you have a completely passive system, it is entirely dependent on that coherency. As soon as you start losing that coherency, you immediately lose all effectiveness, to where you have a bunch of individual optical SAMs that aren't really being able to do much on their own. Then you look at, what about the survivability? So passive is way more survivable than active. Active, it's out there spinning around a field. Someone's going to see that and shoot it. And passive, though, not really. No one's going to know it's there unless they visually acquire it. That's not outputting a signal. And when you have a coherent optical system where everything is, or a coherent system where you're much more on the optical side, super effective. But as you start shifting and you start integrating more and more radars, you have like a mix of active and passive. It's kind of neutral. So there's like a sweet spot where you're kind of meeting a moderate level of a good balance of survivability versus effectiveness. Whereas incoherent system is a little bit worse. So yeah, it's very survivable on the passive end, on the passive end. But as you start shifting your system towards more of an active, you start losing that survivability much quicker. Because with a coherent IADS network, you can offload or push those that queuing further down the kill chain. You start with your passives and you shift down to your active at the very end. Whereas if you have an incoherent system and you have your active radars, you need to immediately just turn those on, or else they're just sitting there useless, and they can't really operate. As far as like what equipment, so on your active incoherent, that is kind of your traditional tactical SAMs that the Russians or someone might push out there with their military, where they can operate on by themselves, do everything. And then as you get into more of a much more higher echelon, like a true IADS, where everything's linked together, everything is interoperating, where they're doing all the independent operations, but as a team. On the passive incoherent, that's when you've lost everything and all you really have is kind of you've got your man pads, your infrared type of stuff. You got your camera system, so you don't really have any of your high-end stuff. And then what does that coherent passive system really look like? Kind of unknown. There's no nation that really fielding anything like that, where they're going with I'm going to go completely passive, completely coherent, build this dream system that it's undetectable and I can still get all the firing solutions I need. It doesn't really exist to any degree yet. And so what are your goals here? So really the goal should be a good balance of passive and active systems at a high level of coherency. That gives you a hybrid mix of those active and passive sensors, and you get that seamless merger of data link networks and your AI computations. You want your kill chain kind of skewed to front load those passive systems where I've got all my visual and audio detectors noticing, hey, there's a target over in this region, and that's going to pass it down to a higher resolution camera that's going to pinpoint it, which is then at the very end, maybe switch on a radar that can then finally target it without that radar having to be active that entire process. It's kind of a last second where, missiles in the air by the time, that target even knows that's being targeted. And then that unrealistic goal, we talked about that coherent passive kind of dream system. That's where you have a completely passive sensor network with all that seamless merger of data, network, and AI computation. However, the likely outcome is really down here, where you've all your active sensors have been destroyed. You've collapsed all your data link network. That's all been destroyed too, or at least the networking side of it, or your power source for all that networking. And now all you've got is passive networks, and you got your missile launchers still, maybe. But you've got really limited to intermittent, very short range engagements. And so what does that really mean is that really you want to be here. You want to be in this green box. And if you're not in this green box, you're always going to be moving towards this red box. And even the stream system of blue box, that is really just a distraction. If you're here, you're just going to end up here. And the reason for that is, the U.S. goes in day one, and we're really, really good at doing suppression and destruction of air defense. We're really good at electronic warfare. First couple days, you're going to lose all your radar systems, and you're probably going to lose all of your coherency as far as all of your, power that's running all the networking. And you're going to end up over here where, like I said, you've got nothing but a few passive systems, or you got a bunch of passive systems left over. You've got maybe some missiles left over. You can't really get that many shots off with them, though. And so what does that look like as far as the modern air war? So up across the top here, I got different types of targets, drones, helicopters, airplanes, missiles. You got different shooters. You got your little interceptor drones. You got your, infrared guide, your man pads. You got your medium and long range missiles and other airplanes. And you got optical of like single optical systems, kind of connected, doing basic triangulation, and then all the way up to like fully data linked mesh system. And then also you got your traditional radars of various, lower quality versus higher qualities. And so what do you end up with? So what kind of targeting engagements can you really achieve? So with an optical sensor, it's a very low end one. Yeah, you can pass that along to, perhaps a, interceptor drone or a guy with a man pad, and he could probably take out a, Shahed style drone or probably a helicopter too. But, this situation itself isn't really going to lend you to shooting down. You're not going to shoot down ballistic missiles like that. An interceptor drone isn't going to take down an F-35 unless it's like, on approach to land maybe. But what are some other possibilities here? Say you have like a high-end radar. This is kind of the American problem. We have high-end radars. We got high-end missiles, but we're using those to shoot down, little $10,000 Shahed drones. And it works. Yeah, you can, physically do that. It's just not very effective. It's not cost effective. You're eventually going to run out of, interceptors. Going to run out of money eventually. Not the most optimal way of doing things. And got down here at the bottom this Elon Musk quote here, where he said a few months ago, he said, "It's laughably easy to take down fighter jets. Stealth means nothing if you use elementary AI with low-level sensitivity cameras. They aren't invisible." So is this statement true? Is it laughably easy to take down fighter jets? No. I mean, can you, like hypothetically, network a bunch of cameras together, get a really high resolution targeting image of that, pass that on to a high-end missile, and then use that to shoot down an F-35? Potentially, maybe, but is that easy? Definitely not. Definitely not laughably easy. That's kind of like like I said, that dream scenario of that. Yeah, you're going to have this massive optical network that is like it's going to solve all your problems, and it's undetectable, and it's going to do everything. So I disagree with Elon here on this one. And so what does that look like as far as like U.S. versus some of our adversaries? So USA versus Europe here. Here's what we start with. So U.S., I kind of grade this out because we don't really have that many drones. We got a little bit, but not much. We're kind of getting a few. Really, we got all this high-end stuff over here. And a near-peer adversary, they got kind of the lower-end stuff. They got, fighter jets. Probably should have graded that one out too. They got no 5th or, 6th gen or anything. They don't really have that networking yet. But they do got some medium and long-range missiles. So what happens after day 5? Well, all of our stuff is still here, and we've destroyed all the radars. We destroyed all their fighter jets. That's gone. Any networking they did have is probably gone. Really, all they're left with is these low-end interceptors, low-end missiles. They still got all the missiles for their medium to long range stuff. Like those still exist. They got them in bunkers somewhere. They don't really have any way to fire them though, other than they got this optical. They can maybe do a little bit of triangulation, but like I said, like that's kind of an imaginary scenario, like or a very intermittent scenario. I call this state of being. I call this like zombie air defense, where yeah, you have all the physical equipment to do stuff. You don't have any brains though. You don't have the firing solution derived radars. You don't have that networking. You just have cameras that can kind of see things, and maybe you can try to lob a missile at it, and maybe it'll hit maybe 1 out of 1,000 times, which is kind of what you're seeing over in Iran, where they've got a couple of hits of close calls that were in the news, but really you're not seeing like the Elon Musk prediction of hundreds of fighter jets being shot down by passive systems shooting high-end missiles. It just hasn't worked out the way that the dream scenario would make you think it would. How about US First Peer? This would be more of a high end where, yeah, they've got the networking, they got the high end jets. What would happen to that? So after a few days, kind of a stalemate, really. We've, taken some shots. They've taken some shots. We've taken out some of the radar, some of their interoperability. All they've really got left is, again, those low end systems, low end cameras. And it's kind of trading punches here, just punching each other in the face. How about the other way around? So the U.S. is defending against someone that is trying to shoot us with, say, Iran. Iran's got Shahed drones. They got missiles. They kind of had an air force on the first day. What happened, though? All that air force went away. They still had their Shaheds and their missiles, though. And we had everything, really. We weren't really impacted for the first few days. Still had our jets bombing targets. But we never really were able to get rid of all that stuff at the top. So after day 50, it wasn't that they started destroying all of our, jets and high-end missiles. It's just we ran out of ammo. We were trying to blow up, $10,000 drones with, $10 million missiles, and it just it's not really sustainable because we never really had that high inventory of the low-end stuff to take out that. And so almost to the end. So what lessons can we take from the drone war in Ukraine? So how does that relate? So there's kind of a crossover here, where the drone war, just like the mesh sensing concept, you're taking those high-end legacy systems, fighter jets, and you're replacing them with that affordable, attritable mass of a bunch of low-end stuff, which is kind of what we're trying to do with mesh sensing, is take away all of our high-end, very vulnerable radars, replace them with a bunch of lower-end systems, but at scale and at mass. And so what has been achieved with drones is they've achieved the affordable mass, they've got the saturation, they got the target attrition. But what has not been achieved with drones is autonomy. So they keep talking about, yeah, we're going to get these AI drones, and they've been talking about it for a few years now. And they kind of experiment with a little bit. It's still kind of too soon. It didn't really work out, so they went back into, well, all our drones are getting jammed. Let's try AI autonomy. It's not there yet. Let's go to fiber optic cables. That's really where we're at now. Haven't really achieved the hive mind swarming either. Like we talk about a drone swarm, and yeah, there's a lot of them. It's like far as like there's thousands of drones, but they're not really a swarm though. They're a bunch of independent drones that are operated by individual people, and there's no networking of those drones. The drones aren't really talking to each other to any large scale. And then there's not really been a replacement of a lot of traditional systems and humans, especially. So we talk about the kind of the video gamification of war, where it's all these drones, and you send a fighter jet out there, the pilot is at risk, but you send a drone, no one's at risk. But in reality, though, that pilot of that drone, he's still at risk. He's on the front lines, maybe a kilometer behind the front lines. But you want 10,000 drones in the air, you still currently have to have 10,000 humans on the front lines manning them. So that replacement of humans hasn't really gone away. And then you also haven't really achieved any different strategic outcomes. And so if you look at the progress of the Ukraine war, it started off Russia invaded. They went all the way to Kiev. Then Ukraine, using their conventional military, was able to push them back all the way to the current front lines. And then it was like months later when all the drones came and they started coming more and more, that eventually all of the kill rate was no longer artillery and machine guns. It started becoming more and more skewed towards drones. And then 4 years later, you got a very, very high casualty rate from all those drones, but the front lines themselves haven't really moved, and the war has stagnated. And so this idea that there's they're a big game changer, they're changing everything, hadn't really happened in that particular war, though. Like I was listening to a podcast just the other day, where it's one of those defense experts up in Washington, D.C., and they're talking about the history of, aviation warfare. And they're saying that every generation of leaders has this idea that, well, we can win with air power alone. That's it's a very politically a cheap way to achieve objectives, because you're not committing troops to the ground, you're not committing hundreds of thousands of lives, walking across the desert. An air war is a lot cheaper, as far as casualties. But every single generation, they think that this time we got it figured out. That the last time we just didn't have the technology, we didn't have the precision. Now we got laser guided bombs. It's going to work this time. Okay, now we got GPS guided bombs. Now it's going to work this time. And then now we got all these fourth generation, fifth generation stealth jets. This time it's going to work, and then it typically never does, never achieves those strategic objectives just using air power. But then that same defense expert, when they started, the conversation shifted towards drones, they fell into their own trap of they were mesmerized by the drones, like, oh, these are the game changers. They're going to change everything. They're changing war. And it's like what you just said, the thing about how every generation thinks that they have found the magic bullet solution of this is the thing, this is the technology that's going to achieve all my dreams. And now you're doing it the same thing with the drones too, because they're the bright new shiny object. Who knows though? Maybe in the future, like you think about, weight loss has always been a big thing, that everyone's got this dream solution, and then Ozempic came around, and maybe that is the dream solution. It's got all positives and no side effects. More lessons from the drone war in Ukraine. So the sales pitch versus the reality. So the sales pitch, like I said, it's that video gamification. You got a bunch of nerds to computer games. They're drinking Red Bulls and partying and conducting this drone war from a safe bunker somewhere. Reality though, I mean, it's still the same soldiers. It's those special forces guys, it's the infantry guys, and you have to drive in a military, like armored vehicle, and you get dropped off like 40 kilometers from the front line because it's too dangerous to keep going after that in a truck. So you got to walk like 30 kilometers through the woods, and you got to fight your way up there. And then you got to get there, and you got to dig a hole, dig a trench, and then once things go south, which eventually they will. You're going to get overran, and then you got to fight your way out. You got to pick up your gun and start shooting back at the enemy, retreat maybe a couple hundred meters, and then start over and get more equipment. So you got to walk back, grab more drones. It's still, you're doing all the same military stuff. It is not just sitting in a gaming chair and clicking on a keyboard. So it's sold as risk-free. Like I said, it's still a very high casualty rate in Ukraine. They've lost still hundreds of thousands of people, millions of Russians. The remote, in the old days where you could have a Reaper drone flying over Afghanistan by some dude in a trailer that is in Montana. But to get those little quadcopter tactical drones, like all that old stuff, the Reapers, like the big drones, those are getting shot down all the time now. You need the small tactical drones, and that requires still currently people to be at the front lines. It's sold as being very simple, but in reality, there's a very large logistical support. Like no one really ever thinks about the logistical and operational machinations that make all that happen, getting all that equipment to the right place at the right time. And then there's that technology gap of, my entire life, I've always heard that, oh, this new technology is coming, it's going to change everything. It's like 2 years away. And then, 2 years later, it's still 2 years away. So, like I have here, the technology gap, or the technology will solve the capability gap in only 2 years. Reality, though, is typically technology that will solve the capability gap is always 2 years away. And so will we ever get that Terminator-style, completely human-free drone war? I mean, they say, maybe 2 years away, could be 50 years away, could never happen, but kind of hard to predict. Lessons from Iraq and Iran and Venezuela, though. So what do we learn from that? That the U.S. is really good at doing seed and deed, so suppression and destruction of enemy air defense. U.S. is extremely good at electronic warfare and electronic attack, but the U.S. also has a limited magazine depth of exquisite ammunition. And the U.S. also has a limited depth of casualty tolerance. We don't really like to take losses anymore. More than anything less than like a flawless, monumental, history-changing victory is seen as, almost like a failure for the U.S. if we don't have a flawless victory. Further reading, so this is a report from the CSI, what's that, the Center? I can't remember what that acronym stands for. One of them think tanks up in Washington, D.C., and they did a kind of report on mesh sensing. It's not really a topic that's really talked about a whole lot, so this is probably one of the better reports on it, if you want to read a little bit further about it. Any questions?